Chief Constable, the number of serious road traffic casualties have remained broadly static over the last 2 years. I hear concerns across the region about the length of time that roads are closed when the police attend a major incident. What are you doing to minimise the inconvenience to the public of this type of road closure?
Okay, Commissioner, we've spoken a number of times on this, and it's something that's been here in the peninsula for a number of years. The reality is it's the two major arterial roads in and out of the peninsula, particularly as we go down into Cornwall. And when you do get a tragedy, it can be closed for a long period of time. Obviously viewers will have heard of the recent double fatality, tragically, of the young men cycling Land's End to John O'Groats. And of course we understand the economic impact of road closures. We live here as officers and police staff, and also the importance of getting home to see your children or see your family. But in such circumstances, as I would sure you would expect, we have to be absolutely meticulous when someone has died, or there is a belief that someone will die or will have a life-changing injury, that the most full and thorough investigation is undertaken. That's not just a moral or values-based decision, it is a requirement of the law and a requirement of the coroner that an investigation has taken place. And as with any crime scene, let's say for example it was a homicide in the home, some things have to stay in situ whilst they are forensicated and photographed. That said, I think we have tried to invest in technology that what were often human measurements and that sort of thing, we have more electronic, more computer-based trigonometry, and we've bought more kit so that we can space it around the peninsula. You've spoken about the speed of response, and I've agreed to go away and look at the response about scenes of crime. Scenes of crimes officers are not response officers. They will go to many scenes of crimes, but I can go away and have agreed to go away and look at that for you. But we are also, it is a reality, impacted upon the fact that we are 440 police officers left. We no longer have a dedicated traffic department. And that impact will also have impact on our forensic budget as well, and the speed of response, just the number of people. The latest Valuing the Police report from HMRC recognises that we have a lower than average national funding for policing, and with far less officers we have to balance. So road closures absolutely important, but as you know, so is rape investigation. That has nothing to do with road closures. So is burglary, so is criminal damage, so is public order, all those other things. So you are getting more letters about it. I've agreed to provide you with a written report and a presentation if you see fit. But it isn't something that we do lightly, and if it was my loved one who was involved in a situation, I would want to be absolutely assured that road opening and closing was actually secondary, to be candid, to ensuring that my loved one received justice and care at the scene.
Yes, thank you. And do you attend all road traffic incidents? How do you decide which to attend and what units to send?
That assessment is made when the call is received through the 999 network, and it's important to remember as well, because we've spoken about us, we are also joined by our colleagues and some of their financial burdens, and I make no judgment on that. So obviously ambulance attending, fire attending, road clearance, often we are in the hands of the Highways Agency or the towway trucks, because obviously we respond in Ford Focuses and everything else, the best value vehicles we can. They're not equipped to tow vehicles out the way. We've spoken about that as well. Yes. So it's not just a police issue, it is Highways Agency, or it's the fire service and their ability, often if there's a serious fuel spillage, to get that off the road. So sometimes the closure it's not a police closure, it's the police enabling and allowing access for other emergency services or local authorities. But back to the nub of your question, the assessment is usually made in the control room. If it's a serious accident, we will have multiple calls from the public, and we would always encourage someone to call just in case no one's called. We assess, first officer attends, and it's really the first of who gets there. So we have a task and our system in our deployment. We will task an asset, but often you will have 3 or 4. If it's a major road collision, we want to get there, get an officer there. Often we're first on scene, issues of life saving and public safety, bring more in, hold the scene, and then ideally get officers away as far as possible to fulfill other duties.
Can I switch target now to another question? I've got multiple questions, some complaints about the service offered on 101. I think I understand. I've been in your control rooms. I see the staff working hard in there, and I think I understand the interaction between 999 and 101. It's not often the initial call on 101, it's the follow-up really that I think bothers the public.
Yes.
Could you just comment on that?
Absolutely, Commissioner, and it is very difficult. 101, and I do generally believe there is some public confusion out there between 101 and the 111 and the difficulties the National Health Service is having with 111. 101 completely separate, non-emergency number, introduced through the Home Office to all forces. We have over 1 million calls for assistance, some through 999, some through 101. Obviously, we monitor our response time from the time it's put through, particularly emergency, which comes through a switchboard prior to coming to police. And we hit or exceed all our targets for answering those calls. I mean, you're up in 94% answering times within the time limit. And surveying says in terms of ease of contact around, we measure 3 crime types, burglary, vehicle crime and violence, a 94% satisfaction rate about ease of contact and advice given. Now, that means 6% of people are dissatisfied. So in one breath, that's not many, if you look at a volume of calls of 1 million, but 6% in 1 million calls is an awful lot of contacts, and I think quite understandably those people write to you or indeed write to me about their experience. The 990 plus thousand others don't. That's the nature of things. We're a public service. So our control room staff work really, really hard and relentlessly to manage that demand, and I think, and I've said it to you, I think they do incredibly well. Where I feel there is a room to improve, and we can try and drive that 94% margin down further, but I think if members of the public want to go out and look at call centres nationally in other areas, that's a pretty good achievement rate. 999 really top end. I think it's the follow-up. So once the person's got through, do we signpost them? Do we solve their problem? And particularly with less resources, we have to do more organisationally, not the call centre necessarily, to try and resolve problems at the first point of contact. And there's work we can do there. The other frustration I think people have with 101 is having had their call answered, the majority within the 30-second threshold, the overwhelming majority, it wasn't the police they wanted in the first place actually, it was someone else. And because I won't now pass demand into the organisation that we did when we were 1,000 people more, we kind of did other people's business for them. Well, now we're saying, I'm sorry, you're going to have to call so-and-so. And that's a different shift in the relationship with policing that I don't want, none of us would want, but it's an economic reality that passing demand about noisy parties, which is a matter for the local authority to the local authority, is what we now do, whereas before we would have responded and tried to deal with it. But that's the economic reality we're now in. And we try and work with local authority partners on these issues, that whereby we get the call because we're the catch-all for all problems the public have, but we can't always give them the service they require.
So do I get the impression, therefore, that you feel that for the most part 101 is providing a satisfactory service?
Yes, but it could be better, and we accept that because it's the public tend to call you when they're in need or they fear someone else is in need. So in terms of, we work really hard to answer that call quickly and to signpost or pass that person either to the right agency or the right person to make contact, and that could be improved. But when you have a satisfaction rate at 94% handling 1 million calls a year, the extra resource you put in to push that up can only come from actually the provider of the service, and so there has to be a balance. And I'm always willing to take questions, and I will not deny there are not individual cases. You know, there are cases when we take longer than 30 seconds to answer, and there are cases when we don't give the best advice. But with 1 million contacts, that's going to happen. I'm not complacent, but it'll happen, and you will get a letter, and quite rightly so.
Yes.
And I need to then address that person's concerns.
I think where I would leave this for the time being, I very much respect your position on this. I think as the public's representative, I feel that I've still got a question mark over the public satisfaction figure. And we can agree that. I think that I would listen to the public. I will try to build an understanding in our own sampling of whether the measuring is actually giving us a true picture, because I do remain concerned. I'm sure we can agree for the time being on that the statistics say, as you suggest, but I am getting quite a lot of mail on 101, and I personally feel I need to keep pursuing the issue. So we'll keep monitoring it, and I will try and feed such inputs as I get into you and your team on 101. So that, you know, we'll leave it at that for now, but to me it remains slightly an open book on 101. Okay. My third question area is really that crime's fallen by 7% or thereabouts over the picture for over the position 12 months ago, but in the last few weeks levels have begun to rise again. What do you think of the underlying causes, and what are you doing to improve the situation?
Okay. Absolutely spot on. We monitor crime daily, 7 days, 28 days and thereafter, and obviously you look at crime trends over a rolling 12 months, and as you say, over the rolling 12 months, 7% reduction in crime, total crime across the force area. But some crimes are up, some crimes are down. Last 7 out of 8 weeks, we have been trending above where we were last year at this time. So if you're doing your weekly and 28-day trends, we have more crimes for this 28 days compared to last year. The rationale for that, I think a big chunk of that has to be the weather. It just has to be the weather. For those who remember last year, and who can forget it, it was pouring with rain for most of the summer. And we've had the most glorious, and probably the most glorious sunshine. And the most glorious sunshine brings more people out. People get hot and bothered. There is more road rage. There is more drinking. There is more drink-related nuisance behaviour. And sadly, there is more violence. And I know, Commissioner, the issue of alcohol and alcohol-related violence is looked at. So some of it is the weather. And I don't mean that in a flippant way, because it does affect. You know, there's a lovely phrase in my 30s of policing: the best police officer is the rain, and it is significantly true, particularly in relation to public order offences in the street. What are we doing about it? Certainly far more targeted patrols, far more engagement with licensees, trying to not get people drinking on the streets, push them back into the pubs, reminding people to drink responsibly. In terms of the acquisitive crime, because thefts are up as well, not just the public order, engaging with the public about leaving vehicles undone, quite rightly, animal in the vehicle, must leave, ideally the animal should not be left there, but if you must leave it there even briefly, undo the windows, but for goodness sake, take your cash out, take your handbag out. And it's that kind of thing just appears, and crime levels are so low that it throws our figures out. So, you know, we talk about, I know you've had a question about burglary in East Devon, and you've quite rightly challenged me about that. 1.29 burglaries per 1,000 population. So you get 5 burglaries, it's still incredibly low. But again, hot weather, people will leave windows open, chance burglary goes up. Actually, it hasn't in East Devon. Burglary has fallen and continues to fall across the force area, and we have some of the lowest burglary levels ever. So lots more tasking, lots more advice, lots more about the public being aware about their own drinking, their own behaviour, and leaving valuables out in hot weather, windows undone, not a good idea.
I've had some questions from the public over the flexibility you have in redeploying your resources, your officers, your response and such like. If violent crime levels are variable across the policing area, which I believe they are, yes. Can you just explain to me and therefore the public your flexibility to redeploy officers across the region to sort of respond to those peaks and troughs?
Absolutely. We do trend the peaks and troughs, and we ask our commanders to plan ahead. So we have a summer policing plan where clearly we know historically and just common sense, with far more people, far more tourists, far more alcohol, where is it going to be? And the obvious summer hotspots. But what we have is we have a dynamic tasking mechanism. So we suddenly get a surge, we get a rave somewhere, and we get concerns about that. We can deploy officers. There's a lot less officers to deploy, mind you, but we can deploy officers, and they've got vehicles and they will deploy. So that's sort of like the dynamic piece, or a public order incident, and that's what it expects to do. What you then have is you have a daily tasking mechanism. So if you've had the big critical incident, force control room picks it up, sends officers, and that's monitored 24/7. We have an early morning daily tasking, what's coming up today, what events are coming up, and ideally that would have been monitored weeks in advance if the events organisers have worked with us, and we'll deploy. And we have a force asset, which are specialist officers. We can deploy anywhere in the force. They work ridiculously long hours. But those can be the officers who can be very visible, very present, but if they need to scale up into public order equipment, they can do that. So our force support group, they're deployable on a daily basis and a dynamic basis.
Something like a reserve almost.
Absolutely, Commissioner. Yeah. Absolutely, a reserve.
Okay.
But it's not huge, it really is not a vast amount of people. And that reserve is depleted at times because of our commitments outside the force. Again, we've discussed Northern Ireland, public order events and other forces. That resource is only so much. And then we have what we call our fortnightly tasking, well in advance events. So if we want to run an alcohol campaign, we make sure we've got those assets pre-prepared, ready to deploy, briefed on an alcohol campaign. Or it could be a road traffic campaign. So you've got medium-term planning, daily and dynamic. And then underneath that, if you really want to go into it, but it would not be for the public, is our covert assets that we would sometime want to use about serious crime. So we have a serious organised crime gang, which we don't down here, but if we had, like other cities, a serious organised crime gang using violence as a means of enforcement, then we would deploy that into that violence to try and bring that gang to justice covertly.
Yeah. My final question really relates to HMIC reports and quality of service, really. Your people in terms of officers and police staff are your most important assets, and really the most important assets of this policing area, of course, to the public. There have been several reports produced by Her Majesty's Inspector of Constabulary recently focusing on the quality of service provided by police officers. How do you feel your force compares to other forces?
It depends on what criteria. In terms of public concern, police officers, we spoke, I think at the last one of these, about complaint, about attitude, and we're working on that. Probably not one of the areas I would want to crow about, and some work with officers and staff who feel very much under pressure and feel they can't give time. I won't always defend the indefensible, but I think there are issues we need to work through there. Equally, if you look at service in terms of quality of service and quality, we get so many letters that other chiefs would not die for. So you have an HMIC report that looks at statistics, but quality is more than statistics. It's absolutely. So we can have some of the lowest burglary levels, and we do, but you have a 98% satisfaction from members of the public who are burgled about the quality of the investigation and support. So there's a quality issue even within figures. I think the satisfaction levels, we're pretty much average. We're just pitching under average. On satisfaction, we're at 84.4%. You've set us a target of 88%. 88% is the average. That's not unrealistic. So that's slightly under work to do. Ease of contacting the police, which given we're the biggest geographic policing area in England and the third in England, Wales and Scotland, we're right up at 92+%. Now that means my officers and staff are working really hard. And similarly on visibility, we're right up there. So it's pretty hard to be visible in 4,400 square miles and 500 miles of coastline. So in some areas, I think we are national standards. In some areas, we're national average. And in a few areas to work on, because we don't want to be mediocre, we're below. And you're quite rightly holding me to account on that. But my force are really up for it. The men and women of this force have gone through a lot, as have a lot of public servants. They've gone through a lot. But I've run a series of workshops and you speak to them and you can see the glint in their eye. Of course they want to be paid, but most people do this job, police officers and police staff, because they want to serve the public. And their biggest beef is, free me up, Chief Constable, to do that. And I'm trying to work with that as a you to undo some of the bureaucracies to free them up to serve the public and improve our service.
And you, of course, and I want the best performing force in this police force. So I hear what you're saying, I respect what you're saying. How are you actually going about maintaining or sustaining or even improving standards throughout the force?
I think first you have to work with the workforce. You can't impose it on them. So a lot of them have got some very good ideas. So we have an ideas and a workshop and local empowerment to try and improve service. You have to work with the trade unions, the union and staff representatives, the Federation, Superintendents Association, because they've got some good ideas. We've invested in training, particularly at the inspector rank, with a week-long training course. That will run out to the sergeant rank, in particular around supervision and standards. And we've started to address our standards of dress within the force as well. Whilst I'm interested in the service we provide, our appearance is really important. Similarly, we've invested in kit and equipment. We spoke earlier about road traffic. So actually state-of-the-art technologies, if we can afford them and procure them, but equally you must balance your budget, and some things are unaffordable to us. Similarly, investing in automatic number plate recognition. And you, Commissioner, have invested money which we're putting into our Leadership Academy for leadership training. Equally, we're procuring from the College of Policing for our senior leaders some training there. And I've begun negotiation with some of our colleagues within the peninsula, such as Limpstone and others at commando training, around how they instill some of the disciplines, teamship and work ethos, because we can learn and we'll learn from them. And very lastly, we work with industry to try and improve as well. And you yourself, with your background, have brought a narrative into the organisation about leadership and standards, and we're trying to get that as well. But ultimately, I've seen a lot of police forces here within the UK and across the world, and I'm not saying it because I would. Devon and Cornwall is right up there, because the people who work here live in the communities they serve, and therefore they themselves don't like second best, and therefore they endeavour not to give second best.
Chief Constable, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.